You have an almost dead orchid. You haven't been looking after it properly. The media's all fallen out of the pot or it's rotten away, and your plant is drying out and it's just getting weaker and weaker and it's about to die. And now you have to repot it. How are you going to do this to ensure that you get your orchid to survive? This is a soft cane dendrobium type. So some of the media that we're going to be using is going to be specific for this particular plant, but the methods that we're using, you can use amongst all of your orchids, including those Phalaenopsis that we all have. In this video, we'll learn to inspect our plant and to remedy the things that have gone wrong. By the end of this video, you'll feel confident enough in yourself and your abilities to be able to do this yourself at home. Here at the Nature Company, we do our best to demystify the science behind orchid care so you're not left frustrated and confused. Looking at our dendrobium here, we can see originally it was once quite a strong, vigorous plant with these long pseudobulbs that it had, these long canes that have now dried out. So with the whole plant looking like it's drying out, and if we look at the basket itself, we see all of the liner has fallen and rotten away, and a lot of the media has fallen out. And the media that's falling out is pretty much dust with a few particles that just fall apart. So we can see this should have been repotted a long time ago. And what's happened is, with there not being enough media around the plant, it's just dried out these roots, especially in a hanging basket like this that's got all the air flowing through it all the time. It's caused these roots to dry out too quickly. It's not holding enough moisture for it. It's dried out to the point that the media doesn't want to get wet any longer. It's pretty much hydrophobic, meaning the water, as you pour it on it, just runs straight off. So it's not holding any moisture. And as you bump it, you see it's all just falling out. So all of these problems is just causing this poor plant to slowly get smaller and smaller and smaller. Those new growths are just becoming tiny little leaves and hardly even a pseudobulb attached. And even those new growths are dehydrated. So we can see this is desperately seeking moisture. Also, what's probably happening here is because there's no real media around it, any feed is probably just being washed straight off. So this plant is not only lacking moisture, it's probably lacking feed, and that's just not giving it enough impetus to grow. So we really have to repot this, put this into a new media so that our feeding regime can work properly with the plant. Our watering regime can work because, as I said, in a hanging basket like this, they're going to dry out quickly without any media around them. So this guy's been really left to struggle. And of course, the first step is going to be removing the plant itself. It's tied up there, so what we can do is we can start removing some of that old growth so we can get it out of this basket easily. That's attached there to the top. And we go through a lot of peanut butter, so we keep all of these little containers. I'm a little bit of a hoarder that way. Everything comes in use eventually. And see, I'm making such a mess inside. Okay. At least with the media being so dry and the roots also, it just makes this an easy task. Most of these roots are dead. There's very few live roots here. And we see even these roots that are here are just crunching off. So almost like this was put through a toaster. Let's empty out this basket. Ah. And this we're going to be reusing. So we can see what a small little plant we have left here. Let's just chop it up even further, taking away any of this old dried material that we can. We'll even go in here at the rhizome, cutting off these old pseudobulbs. We can see how dry that is. Sounds more like kindling for firewood than it does orchid roots, doesn't it? Let's just cut off all those dried roots here. Okay, here we are lucky enough that we have a fair set of roots that are still viable for the size of plant it is. I mean, we can see how small that landed up being. And with it being such a small plant and us repotting, we don't want to then replant this into the next size up as you would generally with your repotting. Because we're basically saving this, we're going to be repotting it into the same size basket. Because we have a hanging basket like this is the reason that we're not going smaller, because this is really quite small for the size basket that we're putting it into. But if we put it in a smaller basket, it means that media is going to dry out too quickly again, and it's going to start causing problems for this, especially with it being sort of just trying to recover now. If we put it into this size basket, it's going to give it some of that extra moisture that's going to be held in the media for slightly longer. Although we're putting in a well-drained media, it's still going to help hold moisture in that media for longer than what a small basket would, which will dry out incredibly quickly. And there we have our tiny little plant. Let me bring it closer. So this is what we're working with now. And the good thing about this is it is at the right time of year. These guys like to be repotted after flowering. We didn't get any flowers on it because obviously we had dried the guy out too far. But after flowering is generally when they start setting new roots and new growth. Here we don't have any of those new roots that we like to see, especially a little bit of a green tip to the roots of these dendrobiums when we repot them. That's what we generally like to do. But this needed to be repotted immediately because it was so dry, and the drying out probably is stopping those roots from growing further. So we need to give it an environment where its roots can then be happy so it can start to grow. And if we just kept leaving it in the same media, we probably wouldn't get any more further root growth. They'd just be drying out as they tried to grow, and our growth would then just keep going backwards because we won't have any roots to support it. So let's take this mess off the table here a bit, and we can carry on working with this. Our little baby now needs to be tenderly looked after because we want those roots to grow. And how are we going to do that? Especially since, for one, these pseudobulbs are a little bit wrinkled. He's not the happiest kid on the block, and we want him to have the energy to be able to produce new roots. Also, with these roots having been so dehydrated, they're not going to absorb water quickly. So just by spraying them isn't going to sort out any of its problems in the short term. We really need to give this a good soak to ensure that these roots can get that nice sort of green hue that we want to know that they are fully hydrated. So it's not going to be an immediate thing that just a little spritz is going to sort out. These roots need a soaking. They're going to need to soak in water for about 5, 10, or even 15 minutes. I generally don't like to do it longer than that because the roots still want to breathe. They want oxygen to be healthy. So I don't like soaking for longer than around 15 minutes if I can at all avoid it. So what we're going to do is pop that in water for about 15 minutes until those roots hydrate nicely. But the secret here is this isn't just plain water. We've got these magic little tablets in it. This is vitamin B, and we have a video regarding how to use vitamin B on orchids. This one can go into my mouth at the moment. So this is going to be soaking in this vitamin B water for about 15 minutes, and then we can come back and do the magic on it. And while we wait, we can get our hanging basket ready to accept our orchid. What we generally do is when we get these hanging baskets from the hardware store or your agricultural store, wherever you get your hanging baskets from, they generally have this thick layer of coir around them. And for me, that thick layer is just too thick for what I like to grow my orchids in. I want to ensure that the air movement is coming through all of that coir. So what I do is I take out the extra layers on the inside and use that for my other pots. So we're really maximizing the value out of our coir baskets that we buy. Okay, and then all we do is we line that with the coir that we pulled out. These coir fibers actually decompose relatively slowly. Generally, your bark or other media, organic media that you put in will decompose faster than what your coir fibers will. And then once they start decomposing, they'll start to take the coir fibers with them. And that's when you know you've let them go too long, because the acidity levels of your media is going to start getting problematic for your plant. It's not going to allow for absorption of nutrients and minerals into your plant, and you're going to get all sorts of other problems like lack of aeration and holding too much moisture, all of that bad stuff. And that's the reason that our orchids went backwards in the first place. And now with this being a dendrobium, what is the media that we're going to be using to repot this with? He's quite small, so I need a relatively fine media, for one, to hold him upright and give him the structure he needs so that he's not just going to be constantly falling all over the place. He still needs to be held upright so he's not going to be falling over, and that's going to upset his growth or break off those roots as he's trying to root. Also, because the basket is quite small, I don't want to use a big media that's going to dry out too quickly and provide too many air spaces. So I'm going to use a slightly smaller bark chip than I would use generally for my soft cane dendrobiums, because remember, they do like to get wet but dry out quickly again. And with that, I'm going to be adding charcoal. And the charcoal pieces are going to be almost exactly the same size as my bark pieces. With a lot of other media that I do with my orchids, I don't worry about the size of the charcoal. I just throw it in because the charcoal allows for that air movement. It helps keep the water clean, and it reduces the amount of acidity in your media, so it stops the bark from decomposing too quickly. We also have other videos on charcoal that you can check out too. But the reason that I do them the same size is because, again, I don't want too many air gaps in this media because of the size the basket is. We can see how small it is, how easy the air movement is going to be through it. That will dry out the media incredibly quickly. And we saw how this poor baby was already dehydrated. So we've got to ensure that our media is going to be suitable to hold enough moisture long enough while still supplying enough moisture to the plant, and then drying out so that the roots don't rot. And there we go. By soaking, we can start to see which roots are going green already. So that's been about 10 minutes now, and we can see which roots have started to green up and which ones haven't. So the ones that haven't can now be removed because they're probably not viable any longer. Some of them now you can actually start to feel that they're actually squishy, as opposed to when they were drier, you couldn't actually feel that they were as squishy as they are now. So that just means we can go in and remove some of that other root volume that we thought was still viable, but now we realize isn't. There are some white roots here. Those white roots are still viable. It's those ones that were silvery white that have now gone that sort of greeny color to them, that have imbibed all that water. Those white ones generally just look creamy after they've sort of drawn in water. That doesn't mean they're not viable. They're still viable roots, but they were probably in a darker position, not getting any light, that they're not showing this greenness, which may be signs of chlorophyll that is now visible in the roots. Okay, now that he's ready to be potted up, we'll finish getting our basket ready and put the media into our coir liner. I'm only going to be using 1/3 or possibly even 1/4 of the charcoal in the mix that I'm doing here, because again, I need the bark to maintain a little bit of that excess moisture that the charcoal's not going to. Charcoal does accept or absorb a small amount of moisture, but really not quite as much as what the bark will. So the bark's just going to hold the moisture in the bark itself for longer, and that will help maintain a humid environment for the roots without giving the roots too much sogginess or wetness all the time. And also, while I'm doing this, it's a good time to mention that your media should always be slightly damp already. This way, you're going to avoid the media absorbing any moisture out of those roots, especially since you've got a plant now that's under dehydration stress, and we don't want to stress it any further. So always make sure your media is already pre-moistened. And with this dendrobium, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be planting him so that this bottom part of the rhizome is still above the media. And it's just the tips of these roots that are going to go into the media itself. The one good thing about working with a media like this is if you're having to push the media in a little bit just to help the stability of the plant, you can do so, because these are really going to hold their structure. They're not going to compact. They're going to hold their structure together. All that pushing is doing is just putting them together in a way that's going to hold the plant more upright. So they're still going to allow for that air movement and fast drainage, even if you do try and push it down, because they're not going to go down that far. Some of your other media, like the coir chunks or sphagnum moss, you really can't do this at all, because all you do is cause compact areas that hold too much moisture for too long. Also, if you're using that very fine grade bark that some people like to use for their phalaenopsis, that also you can't then push together, because often those barks are almost slivers, and those slivers can all be pressed together, and that's going to cause areas in between that aren't going to get any air movement at all, and that moisture is just going to sit there and rot not only your media, but also cause bacterial and fungal infections, because there's going to be no air in there, and those anaerobic bacteria and fungi are generally pathogenic ones, and they can attack your plant. So with those, be careful with any form of compaction. And there we go. Our poor little plant now is looking much better already. He's now going to just be allowed to settle in for a week, possibly even 2 weeks, that we aren't going to water him at all. We're going to keep an eye on him. We're into spring now, so we actually have high humidities and our temperatures are starting to warm up. So with those higher humidities, we don't want to keep too much moisture around him. Even though he is partially dehydrated, those humidity levels are going to help him stay hydrated. So he's now got to search for moisture himself. And by doing that, he's going to have to grow more roots. And by doing that, we're going to have a stronger plant. We'll really only start to feed him after we see some nice new strong growth on him, whether it's new root growth coming from there around by the rhizomes and into the media, or whether he starts pushing up a new pseudobulb, a new growth from the top. Only then will we then start feeding him. That will generally take anywhere from 3 weeks to a month. So generally the first month he doesn't get any food at all. And then afterwards we just watch him to check how he's growing. And if he needs a boost with something, then we'll have to take that into consideration when the time comes. And this is one of the reasons why timeous repotting of your orchid is so important, so that you avoid situations like this where you're having to try and recover a plant as opposed to just letting him continue growing, because it's much easier for him when he's got all that energy from those large big pseudobulbs or canes to be able to keep growing more easily and more vigorously than trying to recover when he's been reduced to a tiny little seedling form again and is battling to survive. Of course, our little tricks with some vitamin B water and other things do help make it easier for him to recover. But just imagine it's going to take 2, possibly even 3 years for us to get any flowers out of this guy again. And we could still be having flowers every year. And if you need any care recommendations for dendrobiums or any other orchids for that matter, remember, Ed posts up a lot of information in articles in that Buy Me a Coffee link that is in the description box down below. Go check them out. They should be your go-to resource for any of your growing needs. And thank you for watching. If you have found this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.